I love challenges. I think challenges is maybe one of the best things I've ever seen. It is my new hyperfixation. And look, to be honest, when I first saw the movie, I thought it was pretty cut and dry. I was like, okay, it's a really well-made, well-shot tennis movie where they're fighting over a girl, whatever. But then as the weeks went by, TikTok started to get a hold of challenges. People started noticing things and parallels. I went, I think I sold this movie a bit short. I watched it again. Then I watched it again. Then I watched it again. This movie is so satisfying on rewatch, and it completely changes your initial impression of these characters. So today I want you to join me as we unpack the three main characters of Challenges and the love triangle that connects at all ends. We're going to get into a deep dive into character motivations, who's in love with who, why people did certain things, and just really get into the nitty-gritty details of this movie. Before we get to the bulk of this video, the big character breakdown, I do just want to get through some quick rapid-fire thoughts I've had about the movie on multiple rewatches. First off, Luca Guadagnino's films have always had great framing, but I absolutely love the framing of Challenges, the way shots are composed, the way it chooses to focus on only one side of the court at a time in certain shots, the way touches are focused on, the way facial expressions are lingered on. I love the way the shots are composed throughout this movie. Every single shot could be someone's screensaver. It is such a good looking film. I love the obscure camera angles they choose. Everything feels intentional and weighty, and the way these tennis scenes are shot are genuinely breathtaking. And throughout the film, they escalate. They start off really good and they just keep getting better and better and better. And this is because it's coming from an incredible filmmaker. Luca Guadagnino has dipped his toe into horror, and that comes up here in the Tashi bone-breaking scene. And I just love how that's executed. If you can handle to watch that scene, the way it's framed is just so well done. You really feel that break. But on top of that, I love the way Luca Guadagnino chooses to frame intimate scenes, seductive moments, glances, these little kind of micro facial expressions that other films would miss or not really choose to focus on. Here, these little sultry or seductive glances are given the exact same weight and framing that these incredible tennis matches are given. It creates such a seductive, intense vibe for this film that just never lets up until the credits roll. I absolutely adore the way this film is shot and the way it looks. Next, the pacing. This film, the more you rewatch it, it just gets more and more hypnotic. It's 2 hours and 10 minutes. It genuinely feels like an hour. You just are taken on this ride. The music is constantly going. The timeline is constantly bouncing around. The order of events is constantly jumbled, and as a result, as a viewer, you are consistently engaged and immersed. A very obvious metaphor is that it feels like a tennis match that you are trying to keep up with. It's so well executed. Next, the soundtrack. This soundtrack is God's gift to Earth. I cannot believe how hard Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross went on this soundtrack. Now, they did the soundtrack for The Social Network and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Gone Girl. They are fucking beasts. But here they are on another level. And I absolutely love the notes that Luca Guadagnino apparently gave Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross for the Challenges score. In a recent GQ profile, Atticus Ross remarked on how funny Guadagnino's notes on each song were. Reznor responding with the quote, "unending homoerotic desire," elaborating, "it was all a variation on those three words." Absolutely hilarious. And the thing is, you feel like that. You constantly feel like you are immersed in the culture of a gay nightclub. It's so well done.
What did you just say? I said sugar and cream. Do I look like someone who would take sugar or cream? It was so obvious. Why would I be asking?
I think the fact that the director wanted the soundtrack to represent queer desire is actually really interesting, because the way the film was marketed, and on the surface the film is about two men fighting over a woman, but really as you dig into this film and its subtext, you realize there are queer and bisexual undertones. And I think the fact that this soundtrack is meant to represent that homoerotic desire is a really fascinating touch. Next, the tennis scenes. The tennis scenes in this movie are just breathtaking, all right? I could not stop thinking about that last tennis match. I also love how the more tame tennis scenes in this film are shot. When Tashi is about to have her injury, it's just framed on her, just working and working and getting angrier and angrier and angrier. It's so well done. I also touched on before, sometimes it chooses to only focus on one side of the court at a time in this really interesting, awkward framing. Despite this film's over-sexualized, hyper-sexualized marketing, the fact that they were trying to get butts in seats based on that sort of three-way marketing, then really the true fight scenes, the true sex scenes of this movie are the tennis scenes. They are intimate and sweaty sweaty and grimy and dirty and exciting. It really does feel like at the end of these tennis scenes, there is a sort of sexual release. Similar to in Luca Guadagnino's previous film, Bones and All, the idea of eating someone to completion, eating their bones and all, is also framed as an intimate sexual act. It's really fascinating. Now, before we get into the big character breakdown, the big thruple breakdown, I do just want to highlight the only notes I have for this movie. Now, I just want to say, this movie is my favorite movie of the year. I don't have any serious problems with it. These are just things I kind of noticed and wanted to see if anyone else noticed too. Also, before we continue, I am so sorry. I know that I am pronouncing her name Tashi, which is technically incorrect. And throughout the video, I oscillate between Tashi and Tashi. I am so sorry. I literally watched a review before recording this where they were mispronouncing the name. On top of that, when I talk really fast and I'm concentrating, the Australian accent starts to slip out more and more. So apologies in advance. I'm sorry. Speaking of unintentional Tashi comedy gold, there is this shot where it cuts to two Adidas promotional images of Tashi after her big win. One of her is this epic shot in blue where she looks strong and powerful and awesome. And then this other one is this photo of her in white trying to hit a ball, and it looks like she's taking a shit. Now, when I first saw this movie in theaters, I pissed myself laughing, and no one else in the crowd was laughing. I went, do I just have a weird sense of humor? Am I being too harsh, or am I the only one that sees how funny and weird and awkward this photo is? Here's my thing with this photo. It shows the really good photo of Tashi in blue, and then it cuts to Patrick looking at that photo completely transfixed and like in awe of how beautiful she is. Then it shows the shot of the white photo, and I'm expecting it to cut to Art where he makes a joke of, oh, they really did her dirty in this photo. What were they thinking? However, Art is also transfixed on her beauty and her aura and how strong and powerful she looks. He's completely transfixed. So it always takes me out of the movie because the photo is so silly. I feel like it's meant to set up a punchline with Art's character. Anyways, those of you at home, do you think this photo was meant to be funny? It was meant to be a punchline in the movie, or am I just an asshole? Next, my last sort of like note with the movie, and this isn't even about the movie, it's putting the fucking knee injury in the trailer. What were they thinking? What were they thinking? This is genuinely one of the worst trailer reveals since Dune Part 1 revealed what the massive sandworm shot is, and Dune Part 2 revealed the triple sandworm shot. Why on earth did they show Tashi's injury? The movie presents this as a mystery for like an hour. You obviously see at the start of the movie that she has a scar on her knee. You know she's retired. She mentions at certain points she has an injury. So you're putting the pieces together, but they clearly hold off on showing you that for a reason, for a long, long run of the movie. So I just can't believe that they showed the injury in the trailer. It drove me absolutely nuts because if you didn't expect it, if you didn't know what she was wearing, it would have completely caught you off guard and served as one of the most shocking scenes of 2024. But I think everyone going into the film knew that that knee break happens and was preparing for it while watching that scene. Personally, I just think it's such a waste. Now, the first big thing I want to say is Luca Guadagnino has talked extensively in interviews about the fact that this movie is about desire. And all of his recent movies, in my opinion, are about desire. You know, Call Me By Your Name, Bones and All, and then this, they all have this very big emphasis on desire, on watching, on longing, on craving someone. And in my opinion, Challenges is no exception. In fact, it turns it up to 11. To me, this movie represents a Trojan horse. Now, if you're a massive Challenges fan, you have already seen the kind of like big interpretation going around online, kind of the widely accepted interpretation that Patrick loves Art, Art loves Tashi, and Tashi loves tennis. And in my opinion, this is the best summary of the movie. This is the most fascinating summary of the movie. And I think the idea that Patrick is bisexual or just really in love with Art makes the movie, makes the love triangle infinitely more fascinating. The idea that Art is a bit more unsure and definitely leans more towards Tashi, but there's part of his brain that kind of gets the appeal of Patrick is infinitely fascinating. And the idea that Tashi will explore both these boys, but really she's just focused on tennis is, in my opinion, the most satisfying interpretation. Even with that concise, clear, simple explanation of the dynamics, I think there's so much to pull from what these characters represent to each other and what they all mean to each other. And that's what I want to get into. What I love about this love triangle, it's not just two boys fighting over one girl or one boy and one girl fighting over one guy. It is a triangle that at different points connects at all different ends. And I find that way more interesting. It is a true love triangle. And Luca has confirmed that in interviews. The thing I love about this movie is it feels like it's a misdirect. It feels like it's a Trojan horse. The way it was marketed was very much leaning into like straight guys' fantasies of like, oh, I'm gonna go see the movie where Zendaya gets Eiffel Towered. I wonder who finishes first. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And really the movie isn't about that. Tashi's true love and fixation is tennis. You know, the film is marketed, the trailer and the poster are making it look like these two men are fighting over Tashi, but really the more you rewatch this movie, it starts to feel like these two boys are taking out the sexual frustrations they have with each other, out on each other, on the court, and Tashi is just facilitating that and observing that and watching that. It's incredibly fascinating. And again, going back to that trailer, if you see how that bedroom three-way scene was marketed, the way it's shot looks like they both start to kiss her and then one, if not both of them, start to go down on her. But really in reality, what happens in that scene is they both start kissing her. She leans back and smiles, not because they're going down on her, but because she's watching them make out in front of her and clearly act on some desires that are buried deep down in one of them, if not both of them. So let's talk about Patrick and Art. I think it's really telling, you know, typically in dumb American movie fashion, when they realized they were making out with each other, they would have gone, oh, dude, what the fuck? Where did she go? I don't want to kiss you. But really what happens is they just kind of like lean out of it, look at each other and go, oh, I thought, no, you don't want to join. It's a really interesting moment when they realize that they kiss each other because neither of them have this moment of like gay panic. It's framed as if it was this inevitability that was always going to happen between these characters at some point, and Tashi has just facilitated that without them realizing in the initial moment. And look, to big challenges fans, the idea that Patrick is actively bisexual and there is some queer subtext in this movie seems really obvious, but you would be surprised. I mean, I spoke to people in my life, oh, what do you think of the film? And people were just like, oh, it was just some dumb film about, you know, some guy getting cucked and them just fighting over the girl. Like, people really do miss this. The more you watch this movie, the more you realize Patrick's desire for Art is really clearly framed and established. There are so many lingering touches, and look, I think it's an absolute masterstroke of this movie that the marketing is trying to present. Typical story about dudes fighting over a girl, but really it's everyone fighting over each other and being possessive of each other. Incredibly fascinating. To me, it's actually a staple of Luca Guadagnino's work. I just want to bring up this comment I absolutely adore in a video I found where someone says, I think when we discuss sexuality so black and white, it ignores completely the world in which Luca Guadagnino's films live in. It's a world of desire. The bisexuality is definitely there, but it's put there in subtle ways. Patrick's character is definitely more showing of that. Art's character, on the other hand, is clueless to what he wants or needs, but the desire is still there. And I think there's such an incredible way to talk about Luca Guadagnino's films. Because if you look at his previous films, Call Me By Your Name and Bones and All, these are characters that dip in and out of certain sexualities, and it isn't ever made a big deal of. That is the world that Luca Guadagnino's films represent. Bones and All is marketed as a straight love story. You know, a love story between Timothée Chalamet and Taylor Russell's character. However, there is a scene where Timothée Chalamet's character has to seduce a man in order to acquire his next meal, and with a lot of grace and almost effortlessness slips into homosexual acts without any second thoughts or hang up. By the way, it's suggested that he's done this a bunch before, and Taylor Russell's character actually sees this and no one ever comments on it. There's no shame attached to it. It just is what it is. And similarly in Call Me By Your Name, which is very much focused on the gay relationship between Timothée Chalamet and Armie Hammer's character, in multiple points in those movies, both characters engage with relationships with women and their sexuality is never clearly defined, because at the end of the day, the world Luca Guadagnino likes to inhabit, likes to live in, is a world where these things aren't easily defined. And that's why the big moment of Call Me By Your Name is when Timothée Chalamet's father, who is married to a woman, opens up to Timothy about how he was once in love with a man when he was younger. The reason I bring all this up is because, in my opinion, I think you should take Patrick and Art as seriously as Art and Tashi, or as Patrick and Tashi. I think that's an incredibly valid thing to focus on, even if it's more based in subtext rather than overtly spelled out to the audience. So we touched on the threesome kissing scene before. Again, I love the framing of the fact that it feels like they were always going to kiss. It was inevitable this was going to happen, and that's why they don't have this massive freak out or panic when it happens. I also love the read that Tashi actually sees this in them. She sees that there is some sexual tension between them, and she thinks good tennis can come out of that. You know, she goes, if I get in between these guys, if I pit them against each other at some points and pit them with each other at other points, I can really get some great tennis, some diabolical tennis out of these guys. I also like the read in that comment before that Patrick is way more aware of his bisexuality and his feelings for Art, whereas Art is fighting those feelings more. He is in love with Tashi, he is married to Tashi, Tashi is his. However, there's this little kind of like voice in the back of his brain that always has these questions about Patrick, blurring the lines between platonic and romantic. You know, Josh O'Connor has talked about in interviews that their relationship relationship can't clearly be defined as one or the other. I really like the idea that for Art, it's this like subtle feeling at the back of his brain of like, you know, why do I care so much about what Patrick is doing? Why can't I ever beat Patrick? Why does Patrick get under my skin so much? Is there something more going on there? And I love the idea that that is taken out against each other on the court. You know, Art is taking out that sexual frustration. You know, this frustration about what Patrick brings out of him in relation to himself, in relation to his sexuality, and it just all comes out on the court. I also think it's really interesting to note that Patrick gets way more intense on Art when he starts to lose Art, when Art starts falling in love with Tashi, when Art starts pursuing Tashi, when Tashi and Art are a power couple. You feel like Patrick has this like symbiotic nature to him. He starts missing the throuple. He starts missing the excitement. As he says in the sauna scene, I miss playing with you. There's this like level of attachment that intensifies when he feels like he's actually losing Art. I think that's also reflected in the jerk-off story, the jerk-off explanation, where Patrick tells this story about Art's first time jerking off and how he basically taught him. Yes, quite a queer thing to do, all right? But also, like, I know stories from the private boys' school I went to where, like, shit like that happens fairly often. However, what I will say, the thing that takes it over the line for me is how Patrick talks about it. He's not really sitting there going, oh, I was so gross, and oh, I was so... He's sort of sitting there as almost like this proud accomplishment he got out of Art. It's really fascinating. The more and more I rewatch this scene, and I suggest you rewatch the scene too, it feels like this fond memory that a couple share. The way they tell that story is the way people tell, like, their first time meeting stories over dinner. You know, Patrick seems to really hold that as a fond memory. Yes, he is trying to embarrass Art a bit, but it feels like this cherished memory to him. And in fact, similarly, yes, Art is a bit embarrassed, but it's also this like loving kind of laugh he's doing with Patrick. He doesn't get really aggressive and angry, which again, in a dumb American frat, straight-leaning movie, that would be the typical response you'd expect. I also think the film just spells this idea out for you at multiple points. The way Patrick pulls Art's chair in without Art even realizing, as if to just come here, come closer. He's constantly building these intimate moments between Art and Patrick. It's interesting to think about, you know, because if Art is less aware of his feelings about Patrick or shutting them down further, it's interesting that Patrick is the one that's subtly doing all these moves to bring him in closer, to bring these things out of each other. There are moments where for Art, this actually slips through. It's really interesting to look at the way Art spits out his gum to Tashi, where it almost feels like this obligation. There's a feeling of resentment and like, oh, if I must. Whereas with Patrick, he's excited, he's fierce, he's excited to give Patrick his gum. Art is seen in his relationship with Tashi as it's gone on to be emasculated, low energy, kind of depressed. And there's a big part of me that wonders, is some of that the fact there's this inbuilt resentment and longing? Is it because he misses Patrick? Is it because he's looking back on that time and thinking, oh, certain things weren't explored? Again, that line between platonic and romantic. Even all the queer subtext removed, I also like these moments where it feels like Patrick is Art's #1 fan. Patrick really looks up to Art as a tennis player. He is proud of what Art has achieved. And yes, it was a very fucked up thing to do to sleep with Tashi. It is not lost on me, but I genuinely think the reading that the idea that monogamy is the villain of this movie is an accurate reading. I think all these people need each other, and I think they all know that. I think at the end of the movie, when Patrick reveals to Art, yeah, I slept with your wife, in my opinion, it feels like he's doing this to hype Art up again to be a good tennis player. And I think that look they give each other, where they start smiling at each other, is this acknowledgement of like, yeah, you fucking got me. Let's do this shit. They are locking in. It is said in the script, and people have talked about online that they are playing tennis like they used to 13 years ago. Like, they are locked in. They both smile at each other, acknowledging, we know the game we're playing. We know who we are. Let's fucking do this. And I like that interpretation better. I think the idea that Patrick is just a vindictive little shit and just sitting there trying to get a rise out of Art and piss him off and being like, ha ha ha, you're a cuck, I fucked Tashi. I think that's a boring read. I think that's the obvious read, and I think that's the read people have who've seen this movie once and just think it's a movie about people fighting over Zendaya. We ignore these people. I think the way more fascinating idea is the fact that Patrick, similar to Zendaya, is trying to coach Art. He's trying to get the best game out of Art possible because he sees Art's potential for one final Grand Slam, and that acknowledgement where they go, let's fucking do some good tennis, is that all coming together. That's my opinion. I'm going to stand by that, and I think that's the cool opinion. I think that's the right opinion. I think it makes the movie way more fun. And another thing that we'll get to later that backs up my theory is the way that Patrick talks about Art when they're not around. When Tashi and Patrick are in the car and they're talking about Art and what they need to do to get a good game out of him, etc., etc., it feels like two parents talking about the well-being of their child. I've seen interviews with Josh O'Connor, Mike Face, and Zendaya where they've talked about that in the present day, in the latest point we see them, Patrick and Tashi are more self-assured of themselves, and Art is the codependent one. He is the one who is less sure of himself, less sure of his intentions. And Patrick and Tashi are the two that really like to turn up the tension and kind of play puppeteer. Art does slip into the puppeteer role once, briefly, when they're young, leading to the breakup and the leg break situation. Art is being a snake in that sequence. When you rewatch the movie, you realize he really does start going to both Patrick and Tashi, you know, whispering little toxic gossip in their ears, plant the idea that they're on rocky grounds, leading to the argument, leading to the leg break.
I just make me an honest man.
I just got the impression she's not thinking about this as a serious relationship.
Have you seen it again?
I only seen it once.
Well,
Keep it that way.
once you come back, you let me know when it. Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, hold
People
on.
Alright.
Who've seen it twice
Okay, talk to me, guys. Talk to me.
generally come out. Well, after we've told them to come out. No, you get, me and Z get
We
a lot
get-
of flack.
Yeah.
Right.
And then when you see it on second viewing and you're like,
Wait a minute.
You got that impression from a conversation we had.
But after that, Art grows out of that. Art stops with his weird, twisted, manipulative games. He just wants to play tennis, and honestly, it feels like he just wants to settle down with his kid. Whereas Tashi and Patrick feel like they're still stuck there. They are addicted to like twisting each other. They are addicted to the throuple. I really like the reading that the throuple needs to exist. They all need each other. However, in my opinion, Patrick and Tashi definitely need tennis. They definitely need the throuple. They need this toxicity in their lives to keep all their lives interesting and going. However, Art I actually think can get out of this clean. I think Art can just be happy with his kid. And that's the vibe I got from him. I think he genuinely is there for love. He wants to be loved. He wants his kid. He wants to retire. And you can tell the mismatch in that scene where he goes to Tasha and says, "Will you still love me if I don't win?" And she kind of goes, "Nah." Then she fucks Patrick. And what does she get home to? It's Art in bed with the child. That's the only real intimate, warm scene we see of any of these characters actually doing something good and actually doing something nice and sweet that isn't about tennis or the throuple or toxic manipulation. So just touching on the idea that Tashi and Patrick are more toxic and haven't really grown out of that place that they were when they were all teenagers, and Art has a bit. I really do like the read that the reason Art is so kind of scared and paranoid about going into the game and that Tashi is still going to love him is because he knows what this throuple does to each other, is because he knows what people like Patrick are capable of, because he remembers how he snaked his way in between Tashi and Patrick. You know, almost this like, I'm scared that what I did to you guys is going to be done to me. All right, regarding Patrick and Art, I do just want to read out these comments I found super interesting and enlightening. So first off, this comment from Mistakes Were Made 59, from Patrick having men on his Tinder, the jerking off story, the kiss between Art and Patrick saying that Art pining for Tashi makes the sex hotter for him, Patrick getting off with Tashi thinking about how Art is smart and good looking. I think the movie did enough to establish Patrick was bisexual. Also like this comment from Little Frog with Hat, I think it's a realistic portrayal of guys who have gay feelings but are suppressing them. I don't find it weird at all that they never talked about the kissing. I think that's totally realistic. And look, honestly, I think it's a really fascinating way to look at this movie. The idea that there was this avenue that was never explored properly to its full potential between these two. There's this edit going around on TikTok of Patrick and Art, all these loving, sensitive moments together. And I'll play it for you now, because to me, it has this really sad feeling of like, oh, what could have been if like this toxicity didn't come between them, if they could just be honest with each other. I don't know if you guys get the same feeling, but when I watch this edit, I feel like I'm watching a really sad montage of what could never be. And I love the aggression and the raw energy that comes out in these tennis scenes because of that. But now we will move on to Patrick and Tashi. Now, I find Patrick and Tashi interesting because I do think that the accurate read of the movie is that Patrick is genuinely like romantically in love with Art, at least to an extent. So I find his relationship with Tashi, the more and more I rewatch the movie, more complex and more sort of perplexing, because when they initially start to date, he is genuinely really keen on her. He is the one that kind of pushes the idea of pursuing her more so than Art. Art is a bit more passive in that sense. Patrick really pursues Tashi. He wins the game and he genuinely seems happy in that relationship. Art then kind of snakes around and gets in the way of them to kind of take Tashi from Patrick. But from there, once Patrick is removed from the kind of love triangle, from the throuple after her injury, I feel like he's not really that into Tashi anymore. He more sees her as this competition in the way of what him and Art used to have. You know, the way every 5 to 10 years they have a secret hookup, I find it really fascinating because I do wonder if for Patrick, sleeping with Tashi is just a means to an end. You know, it's a way to insert himself back into the love triangle, back into the conversation, and back into Art's life. To me, it feels like Tashi as a romantic conquest for Patrick has left, all right? He's not interested in a romantic relationship with her. Touching on that desire thing before, I think what Patrick desires from these two is really fascinating. I think from Tashi, Patrick desires the tennis improvement. He wants her to coach him and improve his tennis. He's not interested in a romantic relationship, in my opinion, anymore. And similarly, I think he wants to take Art away from Tashi. I think he wants the attention, the emotional validation, the closeness, the warmth they used to have. I think he misses that from Art, and he misses the kind of drive in his tennis that Tashi used to give him. I think he sees their relationship for what he is. It's why the alleyway scene is so fascinating, because he calls out that Tashi actually hates Art and what he represents. To me, yeah, it feels like Patrick in current day is sitting there on the sidelines, you know, happy not having Tashi as romantic partner, but wants to take what Tashi offers Art and wants to take what Art offers Tashi. I find that dynamic just so juicy and so fascinating. I think at this point, the more and more you rewatch the movie, the more you realize he's really not into Tashi that much, and he just wants to get back to Art and that dynamic they used to have. Hence their kind of embrace at the end of the movie. He doesn't give a fuck about Tashi in a romantic sense. He doesn't care about winning her back. That's not what the game is about for him. I think he's just trying to get back with Art at whatever level Art will have him. That's why that scene before the final incredible tennis match, he kind of decides, I'm not going to play Tashi's game. I'm going to start working with Art. I'm going to get him annoyed. We're going to get on each other's side, and we're going to play some good fucking tennis because Art deserves it, and I want to see him shine. That is my interpretation. Circling back to when the throuple started, I do think he was into her romantically then. I do think he saw a potential future with her. I believe him when he says he's a changed man to Art. When he tells Art, when Art was being snaky, hey, like, I do actually care about her. I do want this to work. I believe him. I think he's really genuinely upset after their fight. You know, that whole fight breaks out in their dorm room because he just wishes she could stop talking about tennis and they could start talking about each other. She basically says to him, if we aren't talking about tennis, if we aren't working on tennis, what do we have here? There's nothing you can offer me. I think that really hurts Patrick at the time, and I think since then he's moved past that. He doesn't want emotional connection with Tashi. He wants it with Art again, and that's why when he comes back to Tashi, he's asking her to coach tennis, and Art is the one he's looking to emotionally reconnect with, which is when we get that incredible parallel in the sauna where they have the same conversation. Patrick says, oh, are we still talking about tennis? And now Art is the one saying, well, what the fuck else will we be talking about? A great parallel, a great scene, and it actually really hurts to watch Patrick get spat on in both of these instances by these people he's clearly infatuated with. If we're going to go with that reasoning that Patrick is emotionally checked out of Tashi, what does he get out of sleeping with her? I think it's just about power. I like that comment highlighted. I think he gets off on the idea that Art's going to be annoyed and emotionally impacted by something he's doing, but for him, it's just a quick fuck. Now, whether that's completely about power and domination, or it's going back to fun times, or it's about sexual gratification, I think we'll all have kind of different interpretations on. But what I do know is that for him, sex with Tashi is not about romantically reconnecting. It is just a functional thing that he's going to do for them to both seal the deal about letting Art win the tennis game. That's why, to me, the end of the movie feels like he's letting Art in on a secret about Tashi, basically saying, like, we know the game Tashi's playing. We can play our game too. Let's just connect like we used to. Like, forget about her for just a moment and let's play some good fucking tennis for you and I. Now, obviously for Art, it's a little more complicated because he has a child. He is married to Tashi. It's not going to be this exciting, clean, easy thing to do. However, I will note that Luca Guadagnino has said in interviews that his vision for what happens after the movie ends is they all go back to the hotel room. So I guess the idea is they constantly remain in this weird whirlwind throuple. Next, let's talk about Tashi. What does she get out of her relationship with Patrick? What does she feel about Patrick? I think she finds Patrick a bit annoying, but also she's kind of addicted to him. Like, in modern day, Patrick clearly pisses off Tashi, but I think she kind of likes it. You know, she says like, oh, what are you doing here? Go away, fuck you. Like, she's obviously mad because she feels like he led to her injury. However, she does obviously walk away with his phone number. I think she's always a little excited to Patrick, and how could you not be? He's more exciting, he goes for what he wants, compared to Art, who is this emasculated shell at the moment. I also think the idea he presented Tashi about, hey, if you can coach me, a really average, low-ranked player, into winning a Grand Slam, people would look at you like a fucking coaching legend. I think that's actually a really appealing idea to Tashi. So I think she wants to keep Patrick around for when Art inevitably fails her as her student. I think Tashi is obviously in love with tennis. She can't play tennis the way she used to, so instead she coaches them. She lives vicariously through them. And I think she can tell, similar to what Patrick calls out, that Art's going to be done with this soon. So I think she likes keeping Patrick around every couple of years, keep him on the tether in case she wants to then pursue him and coach him. I think that's a very, very real possibility. And I think when she gets really pissed at Patrick, we're meant to kind of be seen there going, you don't really hate him though, do you? Or you wouldn't take his number. You wouldn't even be talking to him. I think she's addicted to the throuple throughout the movie. She kind of fucking loves it. And I think she just needs to keep up appearances for Art to be like, oh no, is Patrick playing the challenger? Oh, I never would have known that. That definitely wasn't my idea. Whoops. Like, I wish there was a scene where Art actually found out that Patrick was playing the challengers and goes, Tashi, what the fuck? Did you know Patrick was playing in this? And she has to sit there and go, no, I would never get a game going between you two so I could see some good fucking tennis. I wouldn't dream of it. Like, absolutely hilarious. Next, Tashi and Art. Look, I think Tashi likes Art because she can live vicariously through him. I think that is the cut and dry answer. I do not think she loves this guy. When Patrick calls her out and says, you hate Art, I believe her. I think she doesn't like Art. She doesn't like what Art represents. And she's kind of just tolerating him because she sees potential in his tennis playing for her to kind of like live vicariously through him. I don't think she is thrilled by him the way she is with Patrick. I don't think she's excited by him the way she is with Patrick. And that's why she needs Patrick to bring that kind of raw dog energy out of Art. But no, I don't think she likes him. I don't even think she cares about her kid that much, to be honest. And you can tell that because, you know, she actively goes and cheats with Patrick and then gets back to Art hanging out in the bed, you know, and just kind of goes, whoops, yep, that's what I did, you know, and moves on from it very, very quickly. Now, similarly, going with that, when Art actually comes to Tashi and says, hey, will you still love me if I don't win this tennis game? I think she's fucking fed up. She's like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, you're throwing in the towel. Like, if you have to ask me that, you basically may as well be losing. Like, you're preparing me for you to lose. She's disappointed. She's let down because the guy she's placed her vicarious dreams into is basically saying, like, I don't think I'm going to win this. She's turned off. She's got the ick. Yeah, I don't think she likes Art unless Art is winning and he hasn't been playing some good fucking tennis for a while. Now, however, I do think Art loves Tashi. And how do we know this? Because Art is the one that starts this throuple and really like throws the spanner in the works when he basically tries to break Patrick and Tashi up. He plants the ideas. He's there when she breaks the leg. He tells Patrick to fuck off in a very sad moment for Patrick, in my opinion. He gives it some time and then he keeps pursuing Tashi. You know, he keeps saying to her, like, who couldn't be in love with you? You're Tashi Duncan. Oh my God. Like, he goes on and on and on. He asks to kiss her. Like, he has very clear, actual, proper romantic feelings for Tashi. However, I feel like we're meant to fill in some gaps. I think you can tell that Tashi is losing attraction for Art as he starts doing worse at tennis, and I think he sees that dying relationship as a reflection of that. He is starting to feel emasculated. He's starting to feel hollow. There's probably some resentment coming out as he's sitting there going, oh, you broke up Patrick and I, you don't love me unless I'm doing well at tennis and I can't play tennis forever. You can see those cracks starting to form, and I find it very, very fascinating. I feel like if they were to split up, if he is to get mad about the cheating rather than just take it as this euphoric high rush at the end of the tennis game, if he actually gets annoyed and says, you fucking cheated, I can picture him taking their daughter and having a soft life and just being happy with that. Whereas I feel like Tashi and Patrick can never just be happy with a simple life. They are addicted to this stuff. However, in saying all this, I do just want to circle back to the kind of love triangle nature and the queer nature of this story, because there's this great comment I read. And the comment reads, I also think that one potential read of the movie is that Art and Patrick, mostly Art, are using Tashi because they don't know how to place their feelings for each other. When retelling their first sexual interaction, Art tells Tashi that they were both thinking about another girl, one who also injured herself, a parallel eerily similar to Tashi, which, and this is straight up speculation, could have been a lie, at least on Patrick's part. Imagine telling your best friend you were beating at thinking about him. It would be the classic motif of queer men using straight women as shields, which is also something I feel like was brought up in Call Me By Your Name. Tashi, however, unlike this girl from the story, continued in the field of tennis even after her injuries, albeit as a coach. She has agency in this weird dance that Art and Patrick are performing. She is the one calling herself a homewrecker. She makes them kiss on purpose. She gets satisfaction from them playing good tennis, a metaphor plainly laid out in the movie. I think that's a fantastic interpretation. Now, circling back, just in conclusion about Tashi and Art, I do think Patrick calls it as he sees it, and I think there's a really accurate summary. Now, I don't think Tashi flat out hates art, but I think she hates the life that will eventually come with art. I think she hates the idea that they're just going to settle down into a life of mediocrity where they just have a white picket fence and just kind of like commentate tennis. I think she fucking hates that idea, and she wants to play tennis either herself or vicariously through other people until her bones collapse, all right? Like, I really do think she wants that. I think she knows that art is eventually going to want to settle down and just chill out, and she would rather have someone like Patrick who has a few more good years and then springboard to some other people. Now let's talk about Tashi as a person and Tashi in her relationship to tennis. The thing I find interesting about Tashi is every time I rewatch this movie, I get this really eerie feeling in the three-way bedroom scene, right? Where she's talking to the boys and one of the boys says to her like, oh, why didn't your parents want you going to boarding school? And she says, why do you think? And kind of like gestures to them. The idea that her parents didn't want her hanging around problematic boys, getting drunk, having sex, whatever. And I think the reason I find this tragic is like, in a way, her relationship with these guys eventually leads to the collapse of her life, right? She breaks her leg and then she's done. And on rewatch, I find the premonition feeling you get from this scene really quite eerie. Now, do I actually think the injury is Patrick's fault? Hot take, fucking no, all right? Like, Patrick was in the right in that argument. He has every right to not show up to that tennis game. Hot take, like, I get it, all right? I get it. He did not know that she was going to get injured. He could not expect that. Injury is horrific and I feel really bad for her, but you cannot put that on Patrick. I think it's really unfair to put it on Patrick. However, I do think that this like three-way throuple, all this manic energy that comes from it, could have led to her being off her game. However, I do find it really eerie that if she didn't get involved in these guys' toxic love triangle, maybe the injury never would have happened and she would have had a long, promising career. Now, in terms of Tashi and her relationship to tennis, I found what the screenwriter of Challenges said in an interview about their relationship with tennis really, really fascinating. So he says, what's interesting about that in the context of tennis is that tennis is an individual sport where it's completely unequal. It's a very expensive sport. So for somebody from Tashi's background to enter into the sport means something entirely different than it does for these two guys who grew up in tennis boarding school, whose parents sent them off to go be raised on a tennis court somewhere. It's a really different relationship they all have to the sport. Not just what the sport means to them, but the precarity of their position in the sport to begin with. So much of Tashi's drive and ambition is informed by that. So much of Patrick's entitlement is informed by that. So much of what drives her crazy about him has everything to do with that. And so much of what they find alluring about her has everything to do with that. It's all part of it. I can't really say it any better than that. I think for Tashi, it was kind of life or death. It was her life. Tennis is all she knows, and it needed to be the thing that her life was built on, and I think she's desperately clinging to that dream fulfilling in some way, shape, or form, even if it has to be through these two pesky white boys. Circling back to Patrick quickly, because I forgot to mention it, it's also really important to note that, yeah, he is cosplaying as a poor person. It's almost implied that he's like a Kendall Roy type character, like he might have potential to sit on a board. Apparently his parents are involved in a super, super rich business and are running an empire. So he really doesn't need to be slumming it as hard as he is, but I think he's just addicted to the drive and he wants to live in that world. He wants to feel it and he's hoping that it gives him drive for tennis. Now, Tashi obviously resents this because for her, this has to be make it or break it. She's tied down to this world. She deep down knows that if she didn't have this like throuple coaching situation going on, she might have been spat out by the world of tennis entirely. Now let's talk about the boys in tennis. As I mentioned, Patrick is cosplaying as poor, but I do think he loves tennis. I think he just loves art more. And I think art is the true tennis player in his heart. Now let's break that down. So Patrick, he can serve really well. He can play tennis really fucking well when he wants to. You see that at the end, all right? Art has won slams. He has sponsorships. He is a huge tennis star. Patrick is just some fucking guy in like the world of tennis. He's ranked like 174 or something, but he can go toe to toe with Art. And here's the thing, you can make the argument that Art just plays worse when he's playing with Patrick because he's like intimidated by Patrick on a personal level. I don't agree. I don't agree. I think Patrick is genuinely like a peak tennis player, but only when he's playing with Art, because that's when he actually gives a fuck, because he cares about art more than he cares about tennis. Any other time he's playing tennis, he's just taking the piss. You genuinely see him consider taking the prize money to lose at the very start of the movie. His heart isn't in it. But when he's playing with Art, I think the fucking beast comes out. And it doesn't matter if he has a sloppy serve because he crushes it. And that tennis game at the end, you can tell they are both just going at it up until the very end. There is no way that Patrick is letting Art win that without a fight. That's why the ending of that movie is so powerful, because if Art goes to win on that game, you can tell he earned that win, and Patrick like got him there by also playing his best tennis. I do really like the idea that Art is like a world champion. He can pretty much beat anyone, but time and time again, he can't beat Patrick, because something about when they play together, it brings out the best in Patrick and Art starts to choke. To me, it feels like Patrick has different power levels depending on how invested he is in the other person he's playing, whereas Art is always playing to win and pretty much always does win unless he's faced up against Patrick. In regards to tennis at the start of the movie, my interpretation of these two characters is that Patrick could be amazing, has it in him, he can beat Art, and is absolutely unstoppable when playing against Art. Whereas with Art, he is clearly a great tennis player. He wins a lot. However, he can't win against Patrick, but he's clearly getting worse at tennis. He's emasculating and he's losing the love for tennis. The tennis game at the end of the movie, however, represents both of them playing at their absolute peaks. Final section, where do the characters go from here? What else is in store for the throuple, for this toxic love triangle moving forward? Now, first off, Art wins the challenges. I know this is like up for debate, but in my opinion, emotionally, it really shouldn't be. It's very clear to me that the movie's trying to communicate that even if it wasn't in that final set that we saw, Art is going to win overall. That shot showing the ball land inside the court clearly feels like to me it's trying to communicate to us that he wins that point, and like from there you can infer that he probably wins the game. They're finally playing good tennis and the beast inside Art is finally back. Again, I think that's the entire point of that final section, is it's two people finally locking in and playing the tennis they've always dreamed of, hence why Art starts to smile. He's in it, he's ready to go. And if we remember earlier in the film, he said that either way he's retiring. So the ending for Art is pretty clear to me. He's going to go on to probably win the final Grand Slam that he wants to do because he's got his newfound confidence. He's got his drive back from this experience with playing with Patrick. He'll probably go on to win, and then he will retire. I think you're meant to take him at his word. Now, what about Patrick and Tashi? Because I feel like that one is a bit more up in the air and a bit more speculative. Now, Patrick has obviously just played some really good fucking tennis as well. I think he made it clear that he wants to be coached by Tashi. Now, it's a question, will Tashi actually do that for him? And here's the thing, I actually think Tashi would coach Patrick. I think if Art retires either way, which I think it's very clear he will, he'll then be a stay-at-home dad and go and commentate tennis like Patrick suggested. And I think Tashi will actually go and coach Patrick because Patrick also played an incredible fucking game of tennis at the end of challenges. As I've said to you earlier in this review, I think Tashi is the one that can never let tennis go. You know, I think the idea Patrick presented to her of like polishing a turd, him being the turd, is really interesting to her. I think she's really excited by that idea and I think she'll go for it. Now, after Tashi and Patrick are done, who knows? Maybe Patrick goes and finally ends up on the board for his father's company. Maybe Tashi starts coaching their daughter. Who knows? Also, will Art divorce Tashi? I don't think so. I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because he doesn't even show any anger towards Tashi. He just kind of eventually starts getting on board with Patrick after finding out that they slept together. They all know at their core who they are, and I think they all realize that they need each other. I think they all know that they are part of this toxic love cycle, love triangle that's going to kind of like peak and valley, you know, come in and out of each other's lives and rev each other up and disappoint each other and just drive each other. I think by the end of the movie, they're all acknowledging that they are part of this toxic throuple. They all need each other in some way, and they're all kind of on board with each other. And on top of that, it is kind of canonized. Luca Guadagnino said in the interview, like, I like to think that after the game ended, they all went back to the hotel room. Now, I don't think he's literally flat out saying, oh yeah, they all fucking finally slept together. It might not be that. He might just mean that they're going to have a big decompression about everything that's going on and finally reconnect, at the very least, as friends before all this toxicity and hatred brewed between them. Look, that's everything I have to say about challenges and its toxic love triangle. I know I went very in depth. I could talk about this movie till the cows come home. I think there is such rich character depth if you want to go looking for it. I didn't even talk about Patrick's bruise, for example. Like, there's so much interesting stuff we can get into. I'd love to do a follow-up video if this one does well. The reason I did this video is because the first challenges video I did, it was a very quick out of the cinema reaction, just like some quick initial thoughts when I thought the movie was a lot more simple before I started to really think about it. And I think it showed. I had this one comment from this guy that was like, you know what? I expected more depth from you. This is a bit of a disappointing video. That hurt. All right, I have been sitting there for weeks since then. Even though this video has a really good like to dislike ratio, I can't stop thinking about that comment I got on that first video. And I went, you know what? I think he's fucking right. I need to do this movie justice. This movie is so rich with subtext, with symbolism. It's got great parallels. There are so many sequences that just line up like poetry with each other. It's just a fantastic, well done movie, and I will talk about it in depth with anyone who wants to listen. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, please leave a like, and please let me know what you'd like me to talk about next. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.